I'm here today with the wonderful Peggy Liptrott, and we're excited to spend some time looking back at her career, most notably her role in leading the team that created the Polka Dot Door, which is really an iconic show for Canadian kids everywhere, influencing hundreds of thousands of kids seeing all over the world. But the first question is, who is Peggy Liptrott? Who is Peggy? And she's hiding behind that sign. Peggy, tell us a little bit about yourself and where you grew up.
I have a number of names. I was born Margaret Nairn from my father, Lewis Milton Nairn, and my mother, who was Margaret McLean, so I was named after her. And she was called Peg and Maggie, but I was always called Peggy. My father liked that name. So, and I had two sisters and a brother. So there were six of us all together in the family. And both my parents were born on farms. One in around the St. Mary's area, which is in sort of southwestern Ontario, and my mother was born on a farm in Lambton County, which is a little bit farther south. And mother studied piano, and she got her degree, and they wanted her to play in Massey Hall, and she was so lonely. In those days, you had to go down and spend 6 months at the Toronto Conservatory of Music before you could get a degree, and she was very lonely down there, and so she didn't want to play. And she came back to the farm, and she had her own horse and buggy, which I thought was wonderful, and she went around teaching piano to the farm children. And then she also formed a group called the Mac Musicians, and she played the piano, and she had a friend, Myrtle McIntosh, one of the other Macintoshes, and she played the violin, and then there was another woman that recited poetry, I guess, and they went around. In those days, Travis, there was no radio and no television, and so they made their own music, and I have pictures of my father wearing white gloves and spats that went to these soirees, and the Mac musicians played for the dances and things, so I think that's probably where they met. But after they were married, they went to Elsie Craig, which is a little village in southern Ontario in the Sarnia area too, and then my two sisters and brother were born there. And my sister Jean is the eldest, and she was 11 years older than I was, and my sister Helen was 8, and my brother was 6. And so they were born in Elsie Craig, and which so often happened in those days, the whole village burned down. And so the department store that my father worked in burned, and so he got a job in Kitchener, Ontario. So I was born in Kitchener. And so we had a wonderful time. My eldest sister played the piano, and then my sister Helen played the violin. My brother played the clarinet. We all sang, and so we had a wonderful time. It was a very musical family. And Saturday afternoon, I wasn't allowed to listen to any radio except the opera, which my sister Helen loved, and we had to listen to that. But that was all right. I got a grounding in that. But I had a good family.
Peggy, tell us about your background in television. I know you wouldn't say this about yourself, but in many respects, you were a big pioneer in your field. How did you first get into television, and why did you choose broadcasting as a career, and where did you first work?
People ask me how I got into broadcasting, and I took a lot of classes when I was growing up. I took speech for about 10 years, and I studied ballet and piano, and I was trying a degree in singing as well as my speech degree, as well as my BA at one point in my life. And then in university, I took summer classes in acting and directing and opera and ballet. And I finally, I guess in 49, I guess it was, I got that's sort of dating me, but never mind. I got a scholarship at the Banff School of Fine Arts, and at the end of that, I got a job as a waitress at the Banff Springs. So the next year I went back as supposedly a qualified waitress, which I really wasn't, but that was the year of the CPR strike, and so I made $300. And Norman Jewison was a room service waiter in those days, and we had a wonderful time. He put a show on in the Banff School of Fine Arts called Murder on Banff Avenue, which is a takeoff on Murder on Fifth Avenue in New York. And so all the guests in the hotel came to the show. It was wonderful. But anyway, I made $300, so I bought a one-way ticket to England, and I had $100 over. And fortunately, my sister had married an Englishman, and she was living down in Cornwall, and I stayed with her mother-in-law in North London. So I had a place to stay, and I paid her a pittance to for my room and board. And so I thought, Travis, that I was going to be Canada's gift to the West End, the London West End, either in musical comedy or as an actress, because I had done a lot of work in the Little Theatre and college plays and things. I found out in 2 short months that wasn't going to happen. And so I taught school and done Shoreditch and Stoke Newington and Hackney, which were the worst slum areas in London, and I had never seen a slum before. And so it was a great experience, and I wrote a script on those teaching experiences, and it was accepted by the North American service and the BBC. So I wrote and read my own scripts, and then through the year that I was there in England, I did that fairly frequently, and then they were starting to call me, which was very nice. But I had letters from all of those people that I worked with, and I brought them back with me, and that was in the fall of 51, and in 52, in January, I went down to see the CBC television people, and of course we weren't on the air then, but I spoke to Stuart Griffiths, had an interview with him. He was the executive producer in those days, and he had hired 8 men at that point, but they weren't hiring any women until April. And so they hired 4 women in April, and I was one of them, and I got a job at the University Library, I think, Toronto University Library, to keep me going for a couple of months. And and then I was a script assistant for a year and a half, and it was fascinating. I was on the Canadian General Electric show with Drew Cross, and Howard Cable was the orchestra. And in those days, the script assistant had to read the script and ready the shots, and be able to read music and follow the score. And it was all live, and the commercials came from another studio, so the script assistant was a liaison between the live program and the commercials. And timing was a big thing, and sometimes the theme had to run for a little over a minute with the credits rolling because it didn't happen, it didn't come out properly. But anyway, that was a great experience. And then in September of 53, they made 2 women producer directors, and we were the first 2 in Canada. The other woman was Joanne Hughes.
Wow, that's incredible.
We were in the children's department. They assigned us to the children's department, which was great fun. It was great.
So much has changed, Peggy, in television in the last 25 years. Help us understand some of the differences and how television was produced when you first started and then when you retired.
When I first started, there was no videotaping. They did something called a kinescope, which didn't really give a very good production, a very good view of what went on. But you had cameras that were huge, and you had lenses that you had to rack over the camera, and you actually physically had to do that. And so you had your close-up lenses of 5 and 8, and your long shots were 2 and 3 inches. And so that was you had to organize your program, Travis, so that you could go from a long shot to a close-up, but you had to give your cameraman time to rack over, because it was a great sin to see this rack over on camera. You just didn't do that. And so everything had to be well scripted, and you had to make sure that you knew where your cameraman and camera was going to be when you wanted the shot that you wanted. So pre-production was very vital. Mm-hmm. And now, of course, and you were editing as you were going along, Travis, was live. So you were editing between cameras when everything was live. And that was very exciting, but very strenuous and very stress-making sometimes. And I remember one time I was, that was a little later, we'll get to that. But, and then I was transferred from the children's department to Talks and Public Affairs, and I did the women's show called Open House. And we went right across Canada with that. And I remember one time we were in Ottawa, and I had 4 cameras. Ordinarily, I had 2 cameras in the studio. So 4 cameras was quite a production. And we were starting off, and my host and hostess were Anna Carwin and Fred Davis. And Fred had a convertible, and he'd driven down to Ottawa, and they were going to ride around the driveway in the Parliament buildings, and we were going to pick them up driving around, and then they would get out of the car and they would start the show. And 10 minutes to air. The one camera never worked properly in the Parliament buildings, and I lost the front camera about 5 minutes to air. And so we opened up with the show looking out over the Ottawa River with I think it was the Eddie Match Company with smoke blowing on it. But fortunately, we had recorded a bit of Fred talking about the Conybeare coming down the river. And so we started off with that. And eventually Fred managed to get back there, and we took some shots of him looking at the river as this voice. But we managed, but it was an exhausting time. And then I also lost contact with the studio director, so we had to have someone standing on the steps of the truck, which we were using because it was an outside broadcast, and relaying my directions to the floor manager, who would relate. I mean, it was just a disaster. But
so different from how things are done today. Well,
now, I'm sorry, do you want me to go on?
Yeah, no, please continue.
Everything is edited in the edit suite, or everything that the show is completed in the edit suite.
Mm-hmm.
I think so often there isn't the creativity because they have maybe 4, 5, 10 cameras, and they're all taking shots all the time. And so you don't really, you hope that the cameraman knows how to compose a picture, and then you just use all of that material and you fit it together in the edit suite. So it's a lot different. And I don't think I think it's less stressful, perhaps, because you know that if the shot isn't good, you can always fix it up. I remember one time I was doing a show on the CBC, and it was a morality play that I was doing for Christmas for the children's department, and I wanted a cone of light to come down over the manger, and we used masks on poles for animals and things, and so we couldn't get it right, and finally, between the dress and the show, we got a lens flare, and I said, that's exactly what I want. And they said, okay, we can super that over the manger, and it'll be fine. So that's what we're going to do. I was just delighted because it was exactly what I wanted. But I thought I had told everybody that we were using the 2 cameras for this one shot, and somebody walked through the camera that had the lens flare on it.
Oh, no.
So there was nothing we could do, and I said, just call it the Holy Ghost, and that's it.
Well, let's shift gears and let's talk about your career at TVOntario, and even before that, it was called the Ontario Education Communications Authority, and even before that, it was called ETV. So tell us how this job came about and how your involvement with it became, and who hired you, and what that you were hired to do.
Well, in those days, CBC did not have any provision for getting pregnant. So when you got pregnant, you had to leave. And I had been married in 1960, and so in 62, I was pregnant with my daughter, Catherine. So I had to resign. And so I had Catherine in 62, and Eddie was born in 64. And then my husband was killed in 66. And so David Cook phoned me about a month after the accident and offered me a job at TVO, and they saved my life. It was wonderful. And I said, I'd rather come in September, but he said, we need you now. So I said, okay, if I can have a month off. And he said, sure. So off I went. And so I became a general producer at TVO, and it was just starting too, which was very exciting. And so there you were. There I was.
Some have suggested that TVOntario was a pioneer in leading children's education. Some have cited it as being a very experimental and creative time. Was this true to how you remember that season of your life?
I think we had done creative work in CBC too, Travis, but it was new, and it was an educational authority that was starting the whole thing, and so that there were some problems, and there were some excitement about that, and that was good,
How would you describe the atmosphere of TVO during your time there, and of all the people that you worked with, who made the most significant impression upon your life, and why?
I think Ryan Ide, who was the CEO of the company, he was a fantastically creative man and a very good head of the organization. And that means so much when you've got someone that has creativity and organization skills, which he did have. And so he made a big influence. And also Ed Moser, my executive producer, was a very funny guy, and he had a wonderful sense of humor. And he was very well organized too. You need to be well organized in television. And there's no getting around it. And these people that think they're in show business and mainly talk about the show, I think they're crazy, because it's business. It's a business, and you have to cope with that and cope with everything that goes into a business. And organization is one of the best things you can do.
Peggy, how many years were you at TVO, and what kind of shows did you work on?
I worked as the general producer. I worked all kinds of shows, beginning with anything that people wanted. I did a geography show on, and it turned out that it was a skiing program, and which was interesting. And then I did a program up in Sudbury, all in French, and that was, I think it was a bit of a disaster, but it turned out all right. But I went with a wonderful French educator from Montreal, and we did it. You know, I guess I could read enough that I could read a script, and so that was fine. So I was just assigned to anything. You know, I try to stay away from mathematics shows because I really don't like mathematics. I don't like numbers, so anything else was fine.
How many years did you work for TVO?
5 together.
Very good. And out of everything that you did there, what was your favorite thing to work on?
Well, the Polka Dot Door, right, yes.
We're just about to get into the genesis of Polka Dot Door, and I want to frame this part of the interview with a quote that comes from Ren Ide's book, The Transparent Blackboard, where he credits Peggy with leading the team that first started the Polka Dot Door. And he writes, David Cook suggested that she, Vera Cook, visit the head of the children's department at BBC in London. There she found a great deal of empathy with her ideas. The unit had developed a series entitled Play School, which proved to be a good example of the program philosophy we were looking for. Kits were available for sale to other countries containing components that could be selected and used in formats suitable for different cultures. We purchased a set, and they formed the basis for the first programs. Peggy Liptrott became the producer and soon placed her unique stamp on the series, which she named the Polka Dot Door. Now, Peggy, Polka Dot Door has become a children's institution, fondly remembered by hundreds of thousands of kids all over the world. Now, you led that team that created Polka Dot Door. Can you bring us back to the genesis of the show? Can you tell us how it all came about? What were your earliest memories of planning for the show? And when did this all happen?
Started with me, Travis, in 1971 in December. I was going away for Christmas with my children, and Dr. Good gave me a whole pile of scripts and said, "Will you read these, Peggy? They're from the BBC, and I'd like your opinion on them." So I did. And when I came back, I had a meeting with her, and I said that, it was an interesting concept, but I felt that if our Canadian children, and they are, or they were, brought up on Sesame Street and a few other programs, which move quite quickly, I thought Play School was too slow. Now, as I said, there's nothing wrong with that, and children need both of kinds of programs like that. But I said that I thought we could go in the middle, and that we should revamp them so we could do that. So she said, fine. So Ted Conybeare was the educator assigned to the Polka Dot Door, at least to the show, and we went to England in February, I think, to look at the BBC material and choose films, because the concept was that the inside of the Polka Dot, or at least inside of Play School, was reality was the fantasy, and then you went through a window, and then you had real films and real life out there. And so we selected quite a few films, and I felt we had to be very, very careful about what we chose, because they were all English films, and at one point, each week in the program, they had a theme, and then each day was a different day, an imagination day, and blah, blah, blah. So the one I remember was the week of water, and so they had all sorts of seashore pictures. And I said, Ted, we can't use that. And he said, well, why not? And I said, because our children in Ontario may never ever see the seashore. They may never able to be pick shells or seaweed or things like that. So we said, and I said, we have to be very careful and be very honest with that age group because they're like little sponges and they just collect everything. So we chose some and we came back, and that's when I gathered this fantastic team together, and we had Dr. Ada Sherman, who was a doctor of the Ontario Institute of Child Study, and we had our fabulous set designer who was on staff, and also graphic artist that was on staff, and we had Ted, and then I also hired Pat Patterson and Dodie Robb, who to me were the best children's writers or most creative people that I had ever worked with in my life. And so they came on board. So we had a fantastic team, and I didn't want to use the title Play School because of the toy manufacturers in the States, Travis, and it wasn't spelled the same, but the average person doesn't think that quickly, I don't think, and so I thought, why give them free publicity? So I said, we need to change the name. And so going along with the idea of Play School and going out through a window, we developed, and Ada Sherman was the one that came up with this wonderful title, Polka Dot Door. And I just fell in love with it. I thought it was wonderful. And so I said, okay, to the designer, here you are, take it away, the graphic designer. And this is the wonderful thing about television, because if you start with a German idea, and then you get these wonderful people that come on deck, and they bring their expertise and their creativity into the mix. And so the whole idea grows. And this is what's so exciting about being in television, or it certainly was in those days, I think it still is, because you start off with a German idea and then you build from that. So that's how the Polka Dot Door came about.
It's incredible. And that just goes to show the power of team and working together with other people.
I can't tell you what it was like. It was wonderful.
What was different about Polka Dot Door in some of the other shows that were being broadcast and produced at the time, like Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood and Sesame Street? What made Polka Dot Door different, and why?
We used different people. Most of those programs had their set host and hostess, and Mr. Rogers, he was the most dynamic, I think, person in those days. And whenever I would tell people about what eye contact means, I said, you've got to watch Mr. Rogers, because I said, he comes in and says on Monday, I haven't seen you for 2 whole days, and I've really missed you. And he talks right to the child, and I mean, they were right in the palm of his hands. So, I mean, he had that wonderful quality. And Sesame Street, of course, it moved quickly, and they had their cast of people, live and puppets and creatures. And so we had a host and hostess, and that changed. They changed quite frequently. And then we had the animals that really didn't talk. And in one way, I always found that a little strange. But they compensated for that. And the host and hostess would ask them questions and answer them. And the one thing that Dodie Robb was the one that thought about the polkaroo. And the polkaroo, if you watch any of the shows, whenever the polkaroo is on camera, there's only one host or hostess. And whoever was not there was in the polkaroo's costume. And so he was grateful, and he never talked either. He just said polkaroo, polkaroo, polkaroo. And this wonderful mythical creature, which is made up of all sorts of animals.
So that was the idea of Dodie Robb, to create the polkaroo?
Well, it wasn't, we didn't give her that assignment, but she came up with it.
Wonderful.
Something funny, which is great. But may I tell you one of the stories?
Absolutely.
It was, we tried, at one point, we tried to be Canadian as much as we could. And this was a story, and I think this is for the Polka Dot Door. I don't think it was for Tell a Story Time. But it was about a horse that couldn't gallop. And the one thing he wanted to do was to join the RCMP musical ride. And he finally was loaned out to a stable, and he would go out, and he would go out with people, and they would hire him for half an hour, and he'd come back, and the client would say, it's the worst ride I've ever had in my life, and he's terrible, and he can't gallop and everything. And so the owner of the stables was getting very upset, and one day an older lady came along, and she was wearing breeches, and with the stripe down the side, and sort of an RCMP's hat. And she got on the horse, and off she went. And when they came back, he was galloping beautifully. And the manager said, "Well, for heaven's sakes, what have you done?" And so he didn't say anything, but every time she came to take him out, he came back, and he was beautiful. And so finally, they discovered a secret, and she fed him maple syrup. And so finally, he joined the musical ride. And I guess the woman had a nephew in the RCMP in the musical ride, so the horse finally joined, so everybody was happy. But I thought that was a wonderful story. That's ingenious. I mean, that's the kind of things that they did. It was funny, and it was Canadian, and it was the story that was a happy ending at the end.
Now, Peggy, just so I understand things correctly, did you interchange the hosts right from the get-go, or were there two stable? Because was it not Nina Keogh and Gordon Thompson who were one of the first set of hosts?
I think so, yes. And we used them for the first year because we did 30 programs in 6 months or something, which was incredible.
Wow! So the first year, 30 programs with the same two people with Nina.
I think so, Travis, but I'm not sure. I think that's right. Yes.
And then I know Gordon went on to other things, and I know at some point Alex Laurier was hired, and he came in with Nina. And after that, was that the decision made to switch the host from
I wasn't there anymore. I left in '72, and so I'm not sure what happened. But I think I'm not quite sure why they did that, because so often I think it's a good idea to have the children bond with the host and hostess, but for some reason they decided not to do that.
Right, but that would have happened after your time.
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
very good. And Nina Keogh speaks so highly of you. She was the one that put us in contact, of course, and of course she was the first host of Polka Dot Door. What are your memories of working with Nina, and how did you hire her? And do you remember, was it just Gordon that hosted alongside of her, or was there anybody else?
Well, the one thing about Nina is that she was a complete professional, and she, her father and mother I had worked with for Becky Muggins in the early days at CBC, and actually I have a picture. Would you like to see them?
I would love to see it.
Okay. Becky Muggins was a wonderful story, and it was written by Mary Grannon, who was a radio performer, and she read the Becky Muggins book, and this is a friend of mine that wrote her biography a few years ago. But Becky Muggins was a live girl, and she had a friend called Mr. McGarity, and then there were the puppets, and the puppets got into all sorts of trouble, and Maggie used to take her troubles to Mr. McGarity, and the adult would help her out with them. And here's a picture of, I don't know whether you can see that or not.
Oh yeah.
See that?
Yes.
And then down at the bottom, take my fingers away, there's Fitzgerald Fieldmouse.
Okay.
And then over here, it's the next page, I think. There's a good shot of Fitzgerald Fieldmouse and Maggie Muggins. Okay.
Very nice.
And then this picture down here, I don't know whether you can see that or not, can you?
Yeah, try lifting it up.
Pardon?
Try lifting it up just a little bit higher.
That way?
We're getting the edge of the book right now.
Where?
Back it up a little bit.
This way?
Back the book up a little bit.
Oh, okay.
And then just hold it up high. There we go. I see it now. Yep.
Yeah, and Nina Keogh, father and mother in that picture.
Okay, very nice.
Can you see them? They're in the back. Oh,
yes.
Right. And that's Nina and John Keogh. And they were the best puppeteers in Canada. And one of the wonderful things about them is they would, at the end of the program, they would put the puppets in the suitcase and off they'd go. And but there were some puppeteers that really felt that the puppets were real, and they were difficult to work with.
Wow. But not such the case with the Keoghs.
I used to come and help her parents out. So
Okay.
she took over from them. They did a fantastic job in I guess 1967, which was our centennial year.
Yep.
And they did, I think, 7 or 8 puppet shows a day in Montreal. And so they retired to, that wonderful place down in Mexico that a lot of Canadians go to. I'll think of it. But anyway, they built a house there, and they lived there from then on, and came back every once in a while, but not very often. And Nina carried on with the puppets. So she had that wonderful professional background, and she was funny, and as I say, very professional. And so she was just a joy to work with.
So it was through knowing her parents that you came to hire her for the Polka Dot Door?
Yes, because I met her through them, you know. Yes.
Do you remember anything about hiring Gordon Thompson?
No. But one of the things that I was very particular about was how they reacted on camera. And there were no children on the set. I mean, it wasn't like Howdy Doody, which I used to do. But I didn't want them ever to talk down to children. And there's a certain feeling that you get when you talk to people and they perform for you. And I was very careful because I didn't want that to come across at all. And if they had the slightest feeling of talking down to children, that was it. I didn't want them on the set.
We talked a little bit about the stars of the show, the toys, and of course there was Bear and Humpty and Dumpty and Marigold. Where did those come from? What's the story? Where did you come up with these?
Marigold was a rag doll of my daughter's, and Bear was my son's Pooh Bear. And we were talking about that just a little while ago about that, and then he said, "And Mom, you always brought them home at night to us." So I remembered. But no, Marigold was her doll, and then they reproduced her and changed her around a bit too. But I think I bought her out of the country someplace, I can't remember where. And of course Bear was Pooh Bear, that was Eddie's. Well, whenever we traveled, we almost had to get a seat for Pooh Bear because he was so big.
Wow, so they would be brought to the set during the day and they'd have to come home at night with you.
That's right, yes.
And what about Humpty and Dumpty? Do you remember where they came from?
Well, that was the original Play School.
Okay.
Characters, right, yes. And I think the BBC people used to come around and visit the programs on the various countries, and they didn't say very much about the Polka Dot Door, and I think they were a little jealous because we had so much fun, and I thought the show was so much better than their Play School. Play School's I mean, it's a name that I think is a little, what shall I say? To me, it's not very creative.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, we did use their idea of going through a window, but we had the polka dots and the polka dot windows and the polka dot doors, so that was a little different.
Yeah, it sounds like some of the, in your mind, which ideas were conceptually borrowed from the show? You talked about borrowing the footage, which was licensed originally, and you talked about the going through the door and having fantasy and reality, and we talked about a couple of the dolls. Was there anything else that comes to mind that were conceptual ideas?
The Polkaroo was very original.
That was original for us?
Very much so, yes. And of course, the Canadian stories were too.
Right. Was there anything else that we borrowed from Play School aside from the things that I mentioned?
I don't think so, Travis. No.
Now, during the time that you were there, like you mentioned, Nina Keel was the first host, and you didn't recall any memories regarding Gordon Thompson. Do you have any other memories of hiring anybody else to host the show while you were the producer?
I tell you, Travis, it was a very exciting time, but a very, very busy time because we, by the time Ted and I got back from England, that was near the end of February, and so we came up with the idea of the Polka Dot Door in March, and we had to get the music, we had to get the stories, we had to get the set, we had to get the designs, and we were supposed to start videotaping in July. So it was a very, very busy time with everything that we had to do, if you can imagine, because this was going to be the model of all the shows to come. So Pat Patterson and Dodie Robb wrote 15 scripts, and they used the play school scripts, but they altered them so much that you wouldn't know them, I don't think. But they used those as sort of background in the Imagination Day, and I can't remember. I emailed Nina, as a matter of fact, to see if she could remember the other names of the days in the week.
Well, I can tell you there was Animal Day, and there was Imagination Day, and there was Dress Up Day, and I forget what Monday and Tuesday were off the top of my head, but I do have them written down somewhere.
Right, good. Well, and that's what the theme, they had a theme for the week, and then each of those days talked about how that theme interacted with that theme, that daily theme, as well as the week's theme. So it was a good concept.
Now, you mentioned the chronology of when this was happening. In most documents that I've written, it said that Polka Dot Door started in 1971. Is that correct, or would it be 72?
Now they bought the scripts, and I think they had a contract with BBC in 71, but we didn't start the production till 72, and then we did the 15 shows that summer. And while we were doing the shows, Pat and Dodie were writing the next 15 to be produced in September.
Wow.
So we were busy.
So just to be clear on this, you did 2 sets of 15 from your recollection.
So that was a year's program, 30 programs.
Wow. 30 programs that would be broadcast over and over again. So, wow. Now, in terms of the arrangement that was made with the BBC, was that specifically just to use the footage that would be seen through the Polka Dot Door and to borrow the conceptual ideas?
I'm not sure, Travis. Dr. Vera Good could tell you. And maybe, I don't think Ruth had anything to do with the Polka Dot Door, though, Ruth Vernon. But from what I can gather, I think in Rannine's book, or in one of the quotes, I think he finally stopped the contract with the BBC. And in one way, Travis, I was a little disappointed that we even bothered with the play school and the BBC, because we had such creative talent in Canada in those days that why didn't we design our own, And I always felt a little badly that we hadn't done that, but and maybe I felt that there were a lot of Anglophiles in TVOntario in those days, and also because Play School was an award-winning program, and our program was based on that. Then they had something to fall back on, which I suppose is gratifying for them, and it was a safety net,
Mm-hmm.
But I was all set. I would have been quite prepared to go out on a limb and start our own program because, as I say, we had such talented people.
Certainly, tremendous amount of talent there. You mentioned Dodie Robb and the other gentleman who wrote their music and the scripts and their roles on the team. Also, another member of the team was Ted Conybeare. What was his role, and what are your memories of Ted? Now the late Ted Conybeare, but what are your memories of working with Ted?
He was the educator on the program.
And what does that actually involved in terms of being an educator?
Was to make sure that the education values in the program were uppermost in the scripts and in the production.
Very good. Was there anybody else aside from Ted and Vera and Dodie and Pat that was part of your team that had an integral role in the formation of the early shows that you can remember?
Well, no, we just had a wonderful crew, and this wonderful Irishman. I think I mentioned to you one time. He was the studio director, and it was any studio director. But I remember looking at Marigold, and I thought she looks pretty. She's going to look a little shabby, and so I mentioned this on the talk back, and John, his name was, he came back and he said, "Oh, it's the heartbreak of psoriasis," and that. And there was a special salve or something to get for psoriasis, and that was their motto.
Oh,
and we
my goodness.
out with laughter. But we got her fixed up. She just needed
Wow. Now, as far as your time with those first 30 episodes that you produced, was the contract with the BBC in place for those 30 episodes? You guys used the BBC film for those 30 episodes?
Yes, we did.
Okay. Now, what types of things did you do in producing the show that would make it uniquely Canadian?
Well, just I guess my values in production,
Mm-hmm.
how I represented the host and hostess to the audience, so that they respected the children that they were talking to and that they were performing for, and we used Canadian content as much as we could, and that's a hard question to answer, I think.
Yeah, yeah. Now, we've talked a little bit about some things that have become iconic with the show, and part of my job as an archivist and historian with limited access to footage from this early of a time frame is just to kind of put it together through these interviews. These are detailed things, but tell me if any of these were in place, at least when you started the show. Storytime clock and Storytime mouse.
I don't think we had a Storytime mouse in the first 30 programs, and I think we still had the clock, because we always talked about the big hand on the little hand, but I would have to look at some of the programs, Travis, I think, to see them again.
What about the pet shed on Thursdays for Animal Day? In the 80s, they used to bring out pets and they basically had a shed that was part of the set that would be rolled out. Any of that ring a bell?
No, we didn't have that.
Now, we already talked about the stuffed animals, which were there from the beginning, Bear and Marigold and Humpty and Dumpty. One memory that I have from my childhood is that there used to be a chest in the shape of a smaller kind of play school house where the toys would be put to go to sleep at the end of every week, and that's where they would be until Monday. Does any of that ring a bell?
No, but good for you to remember that.
And then, of course, we talked about Doty's creation, the Polkaroo, which was there right from the beginning. Now, was it true even from the beginning that Polkaroo would only come out once a week?
No, he used to come out more frequently than that.
Okay.
And sometimes it was once a program.
Okay.
Right, and as I say, it was always the other person that was in the costume.
Now, Nina tells me, by the time my memory kicks into gear, it would be the 1980s, and Nina tells me that there was a time when, see, in the 80s, it was always the male host that missed Polkaroo, and there was a catchphrase that was developed. He would come out and say, "I missed him again." Now, Nina tells me that in the early days, at least she remembers it this way, that sometimes it would be the female that was in the Polkaroo costume. Is that correct?
Yes, it was. Yes. Either one of them could step into it.
Very interesting. And I know, also by the time the 80s rolled around, Polkaroo sadly only came out on Imagination Day, which was quite fitting considering he was a fictional character.
But I think he came out in practically every show. But, we used him. We had a party for Doty Rob at one point, and we couldn't find anybody to be the Polkaroo, so I said I would do it. And it was very hot backstage, and I was sitting there with the head off, drinking a beer out of a bottle. Said, "Good heavens, the Polkaroo is having a beer."
Now, Peggy, there are a lot of people out there that would pay to see that picture, let me tell you.
Well, I haven't got it, so there.
You mentioned the set designer for the Polka Dot Door. Who was it that created that door and most of the set? Do you remember?
No, and I feel so badly that I don't remember, and I tried to get the name from the archives and TVO, and they don't have it. They have very little that's left of anything from the Polka Dot Door, so I felt badly about that. And he had designed other things too. He was very talented, and we had fantastic graphic artists too, which also worked together with the set to make the program.
If I were to ask you, Peggy, to close your eyes and to remember in your mind what the Polka Dot set looked like in those first 2 years, what do you see in the picture of your mind?
Just the door,
yeah.
Travis, and how we managed that. And it was magical. It was wonderful.
It's incredible. Do you remember the name of the person who designed the graphics that were used on the intro and the outro of the show?
I don't, and I feel so badly about that. And I've tried to find out too.
Because the interesting thing about that, Peggy, is I'm not sure if you know this, but that, that intro and that outro became iconic because it was used. I was talking to Jed Mackay, who was the producer from 85 to 93 today, and he retained that during his run. He said he remembers cleaning up the film because apparently by that time it was quite old and crackly.
I would think so, right? Yes.
But it's really interesting to know that the opening from 71 right on through the whole run of the series was maintained.
72.
72, sorry.
Pat Patterson was the one that wrote the song.
Okay.
For both beginning and ending, and and made sure that each day changed, from imagination to pet day to whatever, and then I hired the woman, and she still, she was still going strong, and I don't remember her name either, which is terrible, but I don't.
This is the woman that sang
the woman that sang the song, right? Yes.
Right. Wow. Well, yeah, that has just become iconic, that little cartoon intro and outro.
Yes, right.
From your memory, was the show always recorded in color right from the beginning?
Well, it's interesting because I can't remember, but I think so. I think by that time everything was in color in the 70s.
Yeah. From my research, it seems like the early 1970s, color was certainly available, but I know that I wasn't sure if it gotten over the cusp of it being really expensive.
Remember, and I don't ever remember looking at black and white pictures in the control room. I think it was all in color.
Did you ever have the opportunity to watch some of the episodes that you produced, either when they aired or afterwards?
Oh, I think so. But as I say, I was so busy, not only getting the first 15 done, but the next 15 done.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think we mentioned this already, but it indeed was, as far as you know, recorded onto probably 2-inch videotape, and it wasn't done live.
No, it was recorded. We used a studio down on TVO didn't have their own studios.
Right.
So we used a studio down the corner of Charles and Bay, and I was trying to remember the name of that, but it was a big studio, and they were very good to us. And as I said, the crew was fantastic.
Do you know?
And usually we used CBC crews or other people in the crew. And they all had sort of CBC experience because that was the only place that people could get experience.
Right.
Now, as you said, City TV and CTV began in the 60s, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But they really didn't do much. I shouldn't say this probably, but I don't think the quality of programs was the same as what happened at CBC and TVOntario, particularly in City TV. Yeah.
Peggy, help us understand how the Polka Dot Door was shot, how many cameras were used, and what the recording schedule was like.
I was trying to remember that. I think we did one a day, and I think once we got rolling, we did 2 a day, one in the morning and one in the afternoon, and we had 2 cameras, and that was it.
Was there any merchandising that was done from the show while you were with the show for those first couple of years?
I remember trying to do something about that, and they just sort of, the education side sort of just closed up on that. I don't know why, because it would have been such an opportunity to have the merchandise there for the beginning of the program, Travis. It would be great.
And it's so funny to see now that Polkaroo, even now that the show has ended, is still the mascot for TVOntario, which in some ways is bizarre because there's so many people that don't remember it.
That's right. Well, interestingly enough, I used to have a Polkaroo sitting on my desk here, and I gave it away just a few weeks ago. I should have kept it, but I didn't know that I was having this interview with you yet.
What was your philosophy behind the Polka Dot Door? What were you trying to accomplish as its producer, and what had been mandated to you by your boss?
What did you say about my boss?
I said, what had been mandated to you by your boss?
Well, it was to take the scripts of the BBC, change them into something that we could use and make it truly Canadian. And then the big thing was to make it entertaining and also educational. So those were the 2 things. And as I said, those are important. They're both important for any children's show, Travis. And particularly to respect the child and what you're going to teach them and what they're learning.
I have a quote here from Vera Good that I think in our correspondence and our talking, we decided that this summed it up well. And Vera writes, "The Polka Dot Door is a series which encourages curiosity, creativity, participation, and humor. It presents appropriate information to broaden and enrich the children's understanding of the world around them. It helps children to enjoy fantasy and to know the difference between fact and fantasy. It prepares them for the specifics or learning which the teacher will lead them into at their own pace when they are ready."
Fantastic. Couldn't have said it better myself. Much better for Dr. Good to say it. That was the philosophy behind the whole program. And you have to make any children's show attractive enough that they want to watch it. And let's not have any dull things, and one of the words that I would never allow anybody to say was, "Come on now and let's have fun, everybody." I can't stand that. I mean, how do they know it's fun for the child? So that's what I mean by respecting the child. You never say, "Come on and let's have fun." You'll say, "Let's do this and see what happens."
It's funny because I believe that imprint that you left and that philosophy was maintained and held up by people who worked on the show after you. And I know that because I've spoken to them, and they say similar things, and that's wonderful to hear that you instituted that.
Well, thank you.
Did you sense at the time that you were helping create a huge cultural phenomenon, and how does it feel to be part of a team, the leader of the team that created one of the most beloved children's shows in Canada?
No, I had no idea that's what we were doing when we were doing it. I mean, it was so much fun to do, and we had such a great team and great crew and great talent. And I mean, we just enjoyed doing it so much. And so you don't sort of think about the future when you're enjoying yourself that much. You hope it'll be a success. And so there you are. No, I had no idea that it was going to be that popular.
One of the, we've talked about this before, but one of the unfortunate things is especially those early episodes. In fact, all of the episodes that you produced are somewhere locked away, and where we've been told we cannot, at least at this time, have access to them, can screen them or see them. A lot of secrecy as to actually what still does exist. And we're trying to politely and with some level of tenacity kind of chip away and see what is still actually out there. If you could give a message, if I told you, hey, TVOntario is listening right now, what message would you give as the first producer of Polka Dot Door and one of the leaders on the team that created the show? What message would you like to give them in terms of making this material at least accessible to archivists, historians, and those who are interested? What would you say to them?
Please take the time to help us, because we'd like to preserve some of these things, and we want to get into them and check them out and see why the program has become an icon. And I feel badly that they haven't been as cooperative as they should be with you, Travis. So I apologize for them, and let's get on the ball, people, and get going and help you.
Thank you. You've been a wonderful help, and your support is so much greatly appreciated. When was the last time that you remember seeing anything that you did in terms of Polka Dot Door, and did you retain anything from your time there?
Not really, Travis, but I wanted to tell you that Dr. Good, I think, is still alive, and she lives in Aurelia or Barrie or someplace, I think.
Okay.
Oh, I mean, and a couple of years ago, she gave a lecture at Wilfrid Laurier University, and I emailed her, I think. I asked them if they would, university, if they would give me her email, and they said yes, they would. And so she would be an ideal person to talk to, and she might be able to put some pressure on TVO2 to help you. I don't really remember seeing any episodes at the end of the show. I probably watched them in the fall when we were screening them, or in the spring when the second part came on, but I don't remember very much about it.
A couple of wrap-up questions as we finish this interview up. When you think back on Polka Dot Door, what are you most proud of?
I think because it has been a success,
what is your favorite memory from your producing days at Polka Dot Door? Maybe a favorite episode, or maybe, I don't know if there's a picture in your mind that you have of Nina doing something funny. What is there a specific memory from any of those 30 shows that you still have in your brain that you're just like, oh, I remember when this happened?
Travis, we were working so hard that I don't remember very much about some funny things happened, but it's just a joy to work on the program and with all these creative people. And it was an interesting program to do.
Well, on behalf of so many people, if you haven't been told before, in front of thousands or how many ever will actually watch this interview, I want to say thank you. Thank you for leading the team that created an iconic children's program that was not only entertaining but educational, and that is imprinted in the minds of so many young Canadians. It's just remarkable to see how many people remember the show and who were educated by it as well. And I want to thank you also. I know we'll talk in a second when that's okay. We'll talk in a second when we turn off the record button here, but I want to thank you for doing this interview. And I know that we've only scratched the surface of what is a broad career for you. And I just know that so many people that are watching this, Peggy, are so thankful for your contribution. You laid the foundation for what really became an institution in Canada, and we want to thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Travis.